This is my personal 1973 D-28. It is completely modified and it has the nickname of the Modzilla. One time on an old Flat Pick L conversation, someone said that, they said, oh, that's the Modzilla, the modified Godzilla. So that name kind of stuck. It started off as a 1973 D-28, which I bought in 1979 in Lexington, Kentucky. It was my first Martin, my first good guitar, and when I got it, it was absolutely pristine condition. I didn't know anything about D-28s. I didn't know anything about Brazilian rosewood, any of the problems of the 70s. I don't think a lot of people knew at that time. And I just, were looking at the classified section of the Lexington newspaper, and eventually there was an ad for a D-28 that was at a price I could, sort of afford. Cut the ad out, put it in my wallet. I carried that around for, a month or something, till I sold just a couple motorcycles and got some money. Called the guy up, and sure enough, he still had it. And it seemed like he was asking $850 or something like that for it, $850. And he said I can go $790. $790 was as low as he could go. All I had was $750. So I borrowed $40 from banjo player that I knew at the time, and he drove in his Mustang, and we went down to where did we go in Kentucky? Anyway, Richmond maybe. We bought it and brought it home, and so I played it, and like I said at the time, it was pristine, it was stock. It was only D-28 I could afford. Over the years, it never played really good for me right from the very beginning. And no, I didn't know why. Nobody else could really tell me why it wouldn't play good. But it was always a little bit of a struggle to play. It was never would fret cleanly. And I noticed it mostly when I played other people's guitars. All of a sudden those guitars play better, that sort of thing. Anyway, so I had some work done to it, and it got to playing good. But when I started doing repair work myself, this was the guitar that I started with, and it's been my test mule ever since. So at one point it needed a neck reset, and I decided I was playing the 1935 reissue D-28 with a 1 3/4 inch neck, and I was really getting to like the 1 3/4 inch neck. So I decided that when I did the neck reset, instead of just resetting the neck, which I never liked because it was thin, I decided to just put a whole new neck on. So I did. I put a whole new neck on it that I got from, I think, Stu-Mac. Maybe Stu-Mac or Luther's Mercantile at that time. 1 3/4 inch. I shaped it, did a truss rod, fretboard, did all that stuff. And the modifications just kind of kept rolling on and on, because once you do a 1 3/4 inch neck, and you've got to decide what you're going to do about the bridge spacing. And it had the huge Rosewood Bridge plate in it. In spite of being scalloped, I had it scalloped in 1983 by Frank Ford at Griffin Music. I'd sent the guitar to him, had it scalloped, but it still had the large Rosewood Bridge plate, popsicle brace, all that stuff. So I just, one modification after another. And the first time I had ever done any of these things, so, I took a little too much wood off. I'd get a wood chip or something like that. It wasn't a perfect job by any means, but here it is. So, it's the Modzilla, and it has currently at this time, it has Waverly Relic tuners on it. It has, of course, a completely different neck. It's got a Madagascar rosewood headstock, which I've left blank. And it's got a blank fingerboard just because I was too lazy to put dots in it. And I don't really need the dots on the front of the fingerboard anyways. I kind of like the way it looks. I wish at this point now that I had bound the fingerboard, to give it even more of the Tony Rice look. But here it is. And I like bound fingerboards too, so I like the way the black dots pop out from it. But this fingerboard's good. I'm not going to touch it. It actually has pretty big fingerboard dots on it. They're bigger than standard Martin, but that's fine because I like to look down and see my dots, you know, especially if I'm on stage or something like that, where you got lights glittering off your strings. It's nice to have big dots that you can see. So the neck is a modified V shape. It feels very, very much like a D-28 GE neck. Pretty good V on it. It's got a French polish shellac finish on it, so it's nice and slick, especially since I put this neck on in 1998, so 20 years ago. And it's polished down really nice since then. It's real slick, doesn't stick at all. I like it a lot. It's a very comfortable neck. At one point it was bolted on, then I blew it and I put too much neck angle on. You know, again, it was my first neck reset. Too much neck angle, I ended up taking it off. I put a shim in under the neck here to get the neck angle correct, and at that time I reconverted it back to a dovetail neck because a dovetail just really wasn't any harder to deal with, and I liked the idea of it being glued on there for various reasons, you know. So it's gone from a bolt-on back to a dovetail. The popsicle brace is gone. I've got my brace in here. Of course, when I did the neck, I put an adjustable truss rod in it, and that is accessible up in here. It's an LMI truss rod. It's a double action truss rod. It's layered on both sides by about 40 thousandths of an inch, two strips. So that'd be 60 thousandths, 120 thousandths of an inch of carbon fiber alongside the truss rod. A lot of people say, well, you know, the carbon fiber would be stiff enough, and yes, it would be, but having that truss rod in there, the adjustable truss rod, gives you just that little bit of adjustment so you can tune out all relief on this neck if you want, and yet it's still stiff. So the truss rod's not doing all the work on it. So that's something I've done on many guitars when I've had to replace a non-adjustable truss rod with an adjustable. And I use a carbon fiber and an adjustable truss rod. Braces were scalloped by Frank Ford, 1983. It's been through 2 or 3 different bridge plates. It's got a little bit of hump, a little bit of wear and tear from those bridge plate replacements. Right now it has a black locust bridge plate, and that's probably going to stay in there. That's been in there for 8 years now. It's got a Brazilian Rosewood Bridge, and the story behind that is that this bridge actually came from another guitar, one of my very first early bridges, and the shape was horrible on it. And eventually the customer, you know, again, one of my first ones, the customer was kind of dissatisfied with it, and I had gotten a lot better at making bridges by then. I think I kind of relied on this shape. I think someone else made the shape for me, and I installed it. And then I started making my own bridges, learning more and more about it. So, long story short, I got with that customer and I said, let me have your guitar back and let me make a correct bridge for it now. It was like a 1947 D-18, you know. And I did a much, much better bridge on it. And so I had this one, and I kept it. And I reshaped it, got it a lot better shape. And I was looking at this guitar, and I thought, you know, I'm going to put a Brazilian Rosewood Bridge on it, and slapped it on there. Sounds really good with that. I thought it gave it quite a bit of extra punch, which, again, was something that I learned about modifying guitars. This is the test mule. So what does it sound like with a Brazilian Rosewood Bridge? At the time, I didn't know a lot about vintage specs, and I looked up vintage Martin bridge spacing, 2 3/8. So I put a 2 3/8 inch spacing on this, and not realizing that I looked up the specs for an OM28 rather than a D-28. A D-28 would have 2 5/16 spacing. This one has 2 3/8. However, you know what? Because I cross pick a lot, that extra wide spacing is really comfortable. You know, if you do hybrid picking or something, you've got a lot of space in between there. Some people say, well, it slows down your flat picking, and I disagree. The wider spacing lets me get my arm swinging in an arc like this, and it keeps me really loose and relaxed, whereas if doing this little tight little motion like this, when I go to 2 1/8 of an inch, I feel really cramped, and that makes me tight. I would rather have a 2 3/8 than a 2 5/16. I like 2 5/16. I like 2 1/4, but 2 3/8 super wide spacing. There's nothing wrong with it. It's comfortable for cross picking. I've thought about changing it to more vintage spec, but the trouble is it fits this neck. This is, like I said, a 1 3/4 inch neck, and the spacing of the strings just runs parallel down the neck, rather than being in as a 2 5/16 would. So I'm not going to mess with it anymore. It came back to me. I lent it to a friend of mine in Kentucky recently, and it came back to me with a real nasty rattle, which is why he sent it back to me. I found a loose brace in it after a lot of searching, and it's right here at the tip of this crack. And I wonder, if the crack humidity changes didn't make it loosen up or something. It was just that much of a loose section, but it was causing. You could tap on the guitar and you could hear it rattle. Got that fixed. I heard another rattle going on. 2 rattles, one up here, one down here. I got to looking really close at the rosette, and the rosette was loose, which makes sense because, of course, I enlarged the sound hole at one point. There's no wood in here to hold the rosette in place, and the rosette was kind of loose and rattling, and you could hear that plastic rattling against the wood. So I glued that up recently, and then we tapped on the guitar and beat on it with a little piano hammer, and it was quiet again. So hopefully I've got all that settled out. But this is it. This is the Modzilla 1973 D-28. Got every modification in the world that I can think of to do, and here it is. It's a good guitar. I like it. And one thing that I've noticed, and I've had other people listen to this too, is as a player, as this person sitting here, this large sound hole just throws a ton of sound up in my face. When you hear it compared to another guitar across the room, you'll say, yeah, this is a little quiet. But when you sit here where I am, you will swear this guitar is louder. So the microphone picks it up good. I can be like this and the microphone will still pick it up. It'll throw a wide arc of sound around the room so that it sounds almost the same to you whether you're sitting over here or here or here or here, or no matter where you are. This guitar throws a large wall of sound, whereas other guitars with a normal size sound hole throw sound like this. If you're right there, that guitar sounds louder, but if you're over there, it'll sound quieter, and this one will sound louder. So that's the effects of the large sound hole. It makes the guitar brighter. You got a more top end, more mid-range from it, and this is a very trebly mid-range guitar, no question about it. But it has pretty good bass too. So, the 1973 Modzilla D-28. I've actually thought about selling this guitar because I don't play it very much, and every time I try to do that, it comes back to me. So, here it is.